Back in May 2024, I made a review of Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link. I felt the game's take on the action RPG genre was really interesting. There were a lot of comments comparing it to Dark Souls, so I thought it'd be fun to sit down and play that. Well, here we are. Released in 2011, Dark Souls is a Japanese action RPG developed by From Software. It took the world by storm with a cryptic setting and story, and more importantly, its challenging gameplay, and FromSoft has been hugely successful ever since. I remember being really impressed back when I played it around 2012 or so, but it also had a DLC called Artorias of the Abyss that I wasn't even aware of. So, I thought it'd be fun to come back to it and see how the whole package holds up. We'll be specifically looking at Dark Souls Remastered, including the Artorias of the Abyss DLC on Nintendo Switch. So without further ado, let's take a look.
There will be spoilers.
Long ago, during the Age of Ancients, the world was an unchanging void, until the first flame changed all that. Within this flame were powerful Lord Souls. Gwyn, Lord of Sunlight, Gravelord Nito, the Witch of Izalith, and a traitorous dragon called Seath the Scaleless overthrew the dragons that ruled the world, bringing the Age of Fire. But now the first flame is dying, and a curse called the Dark Sign is causing humans that die to keep returning as undead, until eventually they become mindless zombies called Hollows. You are the chosen undead, a cursed human stuck in the undead asylum in the kingdom of Lordran. It's up to you to fight your way out of the asylum and to the safety of Firelink Shrine. From there, you'll need to ring the bells of awakening in the Undead Parish and Blighttown. Fight through the city of Anor Londo and earn the Lord Vessel. You'll need to kill the Lords to fill the Lord Vessel with their souls. After defeating Seath, the former Witch of Izalith, Nito, and the Four Kings, finally you can unlock the door to the Kiln of the First Flame. Once you're there, it's time for the final battle with Gwyn, Lord of Sunlight. Gwyn used to be powerful, but he sacrificed so much of his power to try to keep the First Flame burning that now he's just the Lord of Cinder, a sad old man waiting to be put out of his misery. After the fight, it's up to you to decide. Will you sacrifice yourself to keep the First Flame lit for a while longer, or let it die and usher in the Age of Dark? Dark Souls has an unusual story for an RPG because it's very minimalist. It's really only pieced together through breadcrumbs, like hearing about it from NPCs or reading item descriptions. It's almost like flavor text. Because the story is mostly kept in the background, the player's experience takes center stage, but there's some interesting stuff here. Gwyn is a desperate man that wants to keep the First Flame burning, and he gives up everything he has to try to do so. He's basically a hollow by the time we encounter him, and in the end, what he does is futile. The chosen undead can kindle the flame just like Gwyn did, but that's only a temporary solution, and that's the best case scenario. Nothing lasts forever, and we can only delay the inevitable. Knowing it's all going to end eventually and ultimately nothing will matter, do you give up because it's all pointless, or do you push on? And the cryptic nature of the story reinforces this existentialist theme because the story isn't carrying the player throughout the gameplay. You'll have to direct yourself and make your own purpose and meaning to the challenges that lie ahead. Dark Souls is an action RPG. Throughout the game, you'll be exploring multiple areas, which are filled with checkpoints called bonfires, enemies and obstacles, the occasional friendly face, and all kinds of secrets and loot. You're generally getting to an area, struggling with the stuff there as you learn how to deal with it, exploring, and fighting bosses to open up more and more until you get to the next area. As you explore, you'll open up shortcuts that make it easier to get from point A to point B, as well as ways to get to different parts of the world. The way these areas connect and the way that everything is set up, things are non-linear and open-ended, not unlike level design you'd see in the original Legend of Zelda or a Metroidvania. You can do a lot of stuff in different orders, and some stuff can be skipped altogether depending on your knowledge, skill, or starting gifts. You start the game by creating your character, choosing a class and starting gifts. These classes start with different levels, stats, and equipment, but beyond that it doesn't really matter, because you can level up any of your stats however you want throughout the game. There's a lot of different stuff you can use, like various melee weapons, bows and crossbows, magic, etc. So there's a variety of playstyles, and you have a lot of freedom to build what you want. You can even do challenge runs, like playing the whole game as a level 1 character, since leveling up is actually technically optional. When you use a bonfire, enemies respawn. You'll also heal and refill your supply of Estus flasks, which are your main healing item. You can also level up or use various items at bonfires, like repairing your gear or using an item called Humanity to either turn back into a human or kindle the bonfire to get more flasks. Being human lets you summon help for bosses, play online, or even get invaded by others, so keep in mind there's good and bad there. If you die, let me rephrase that. When you die, you'll drop a bloodstain with all your souls where you died. If you were human, you'll become undead again. Dying makes you respawn at the last bonfire you used. If you can get back to your bloodstain, you can get your stuff back. But if you die again before you do, it's lost forever. There's plenty of stuff that can kill you, like enemies, bosses, and traps, so there's always risk and reward. Do you use your souls before continuing, stop and grind up to get the souls needed for something, or press on with your souls to see what's ahead even though you risk losing them? While there's no game over state and you can always just grind for more souls, you have to actively play the game planning around them. Whereas most RPGs use XP as an abstract representation of a character learning until they get better, Dark Souls makes you constantly keep it in mind and plan your approach carefully. It really reminds me of how Zelda 2 handled XP, where there was a life system, and all your XP towards your next level would be lost if you got a game over, forcing a similar approach. So now I guess we should talk about the action part of the action RPG. Everything you do has weight to it and things to consider, like wind-ups, animation length, and so on. This isn't a fast-paced game like Devil May Cry or something, but its approach to challenge and difficulty could be compared to that. You need to be deliberate and attentive, observing enemies and their patterns and animations if you want to succeed, like in Zelda 2. Every encounter can be fatal if you're not prepared, even just a group of basic hollows. Then of course you get into all the scary stuff you'll be encountering, like demons, dragons, legendary knights, giant beasts, etc. The world's full of nasty stuff, and all of it hurts, and in different ways. Sometimes it's one big monster, sometimes there's some minions, sometimes there's multiple threatening bosses, and so on. It's up to you to figure out how everything works and to figure out what your approach will be. And the game is open-ended in that you can change your approach through leveling up and using different types of armor, weapons, magical rings, and items. Personally, I kept it simple. Big armor, big sword, big damage. The game creates a satisfying gameplay loop by making the moment-to-moment gameplay and your long-term planning engaging. The Metroidvania-esque world and level design makes for enjoyable exploration. Sure, some bosses or areas are a pain in the ass, like the Capra Demon with his annoying dogs that don't play nice with the camera in that cramped arena, or Blight Town with its annoying status effects and tricky layout, or the platforming in general. For what it's worth, I remember how bad Blight Town was in the original game, so it's really not that bad anymore. But as a rule, the game tries to be tough, but fair. Like Zelda 2. When you die, it's probably your fault, and you can always try a different strategy like changing your gear or summoning help. So, everything sounds pretty awesome, right? Well, there's a big part that I think really takes away from all this, so let's address it. The second half of Dark Souls is a noticeable shift in quality and the general direction of the game. This starts in Anor Londo. The boss fight with Ornstein and Smough is there to gatekeep you, so if you can win, you're ready for the next goal. You get the Lord Vessel, and your new goal is to fight the Lords and get their souls to get to the last area and boss fight. The Lord Vessel is nice because it gives you the ability to fast travel, cutting down on backtracking. I just wish it wasn't so inconsistent about what areas you can warp to. This is a nice aspect of the second half, limitations aside, but there's also some not-so-nice aspects. The level design takes a bit of a nosedive. Each of the lords has their own area, and all of the areas have issues that conflict with the goals of the game's design from the first half. In general, these areas start to suffer from checkpoint starvation, as bonfires get further and further apart, and that creates headaches throughout much of the second half. To get more specific, let's look at each of the lords' areas. The Duke's Archives, where you'll fight Seath the Scaleless, gives a cool Symphony of the Night vibe, but it also forces your hand a bit. You encounter Seath, but you can't kill him yet. Instead, you have to die, and then you get thrown into a jail cell. You have to do this, there's no other way. In a word, you're being railroaded. From there, you'll have to explore and go through the Crystal Cave outside of the Archives to reach Seath for the real fight. This is a big pain because of the lack of bonfires, and because that cave has an obnoxious gimmick. There's invisible bridges that are only visible through player messages or particle effects, and there's some trial and error involved here. Seath himself isn't that bad as he's blind and easily killed, but you do need to be careful because he can curse you, and that sucks. His main gimmick is that he's invincible until you destroy a crystal behind him. The fight is a bit of an anticlimax, but I was just glad to not have to walk on invisible platforms anymore. I'm pretty sure you're supposed to be able to see stuff in a video game, but whatever. New Londo Ruins is a haunted ruin filled with ghosts that you can't hurt unless you use an item called a transient curse. But that's not that bad since you can just buy those. There's also water you need to lower with some switches. And there's a boss fight here against the 4 kings, which is basically a DPS test. You start out fighting one king, and they begin multiplying, so you have to deal enough damage to win the fight before they overwhelm you. It's like a second gatekeeper to make sure you're ready to go from the second half into the endgame. Good stuff, right? But New Londo Ruins doesn't have any bonfires in it, so anytime you go in there, it's gonna be a trek to get back to whatever you were doing. It's nice that there's still a few different ways in, but it would be nice to have a bonfire here. The railroading issue comes back up here because you need to go on a bit of a fetch quest. You can't go into the Abyss to fight the 4 kings until you go to Darkroot Garden and kill Great Grey Wolf Sif to get a ring called the Covenant of Artorias. You can only wear 2 rings, so you're going to have to give up a slot for this. This limitation is admittedly worse for me because I needed the Ring of Favor and Protection for my build, and since that breaks if you ever take it off, I'm basically stuck with 1 ring slot. Even without that, you have no other option except giving up a ring slot. It's railroading. Next up is a 2-for-1 deal. Past where you fought Quelaag in Blighttown early on is the Hellish Demon Ruins. This area recycles the Capra Demon boss as a regular enemy, possibly because of time constraints. There's a few boss fights here. First off is the Ceaseless Discharge. I'd make a joke about him being called the Ceaseless Discharge, but he's already a ceaseless joke. He can easily be made to fall to his death or killed without posing any real threat. The next boss is the Centipede Demon. This thing is in an area full of lava, and this is where that becomes a big mechanic. Killing it drops the orange charred ring, which significantly reduces the damage you'll take from running in lava. Once again, you're railroaded into using this because you'll have to run through a lot of lava. There's one more boss, the Demon Fire Sage, but it's alright I guess. Nothing that noteworthy about that one. The Demon Ruins transitions from there into another similar area called Lost Izalith. You'll have to run across a lot of lava, and once again there's not much in the way of bonfires here. Lost Izalith's main enemies are these giant dragon legs, which are recycled from a dragon found in the optional Painted World area. I wouldn't bother trying to fight them. They're too tanky, too dangerous, too numerous, and not worth the souls they give. Lost Izalith is the area of the next lord, the former Witch of Izalith, which has been turned into the Bed of Chaos. Getting to it is a massive pain in the ass, and then there's the actual fight itself. What the fuck is this? Normally, a boss fight is where there's a boss and a fight. This time, it's a terrible gimmick. You have to reach the sides of the arena to destroy these things in order to then be able to go inside of the Bed of Chaos and kill it. This is easier said than done. Certain parts of the floor fall to reveal pits, but only when you get dangerously close to them, and the Bed of Chaos has really good reach and easily sweeps you into them. I don't feel like I'm doing justice to just how irritating this fight is. It's really obnoxious trial and error, made even worse by how tedious the trek to get there is. It's such a pain in the ass that FromSoft had to change the rules. Most stuff in the game resets when you use a bonfire or die, but the Bed of Chaos has to keep your progress between attempts. That's how much it sucks. The last of the Lord's areas is the Tomb of the Giants. Lots of skeletons and lots of darkness. You'll need a light. You could use a spell if you have enough levels in the required stat. Otherwise, you'll need a skull lantern or the sunlight maggot from Lost Izalith. There's a quest line you can do to open a shortcut to get to it easily, but otherwise you have to go the long way, and I forgot to grab it beforehand. It was absolutely wonderful when I had to go through Lost Izalith yet again, and by the way, you can't fast travel there, so that means going through the Demon Ruins all over again too. Is this where the fun starts? We'll fight a ton of skeletons and stuff, and eventually we get to the boss after going from another needlessly far away bonfire. Gravelord Nito is annoying for a few reasons. You enter his arena by falling down a hole, so you immediately take a bunch of damage you can't avoid. Ah, the Metal Gear 1 gas mask approach, that's real quality design there. His arena is a loop with himself and a bunch of skeletons he animated all around. You have to be careful because these skeletons can easily overwhelm you with their numbers, and Nito can reanimate him if you don't have divine damage. Nito himself isn't that bad, but the fall thing is cheap, and getting to him to try again is a huge pain, just like the other lords. Finally, I don't really have much to say about the kiln of the first flame, the final area. The end is pretty easy, actually. The area itself is short and straightforward, and Gwyn is an easy fight. He has great reach and speed, but he's also pretty frail, and can be cheesed a bit by getting him caught on the environment. He's also able to be parried, but I suck at that, so I don't like relying on it. You could definitely say he's anticlimactic, but it does fit the story, and it's a nice breather after how much the second half stumbles. The second half really messes things up by changing what made the game work in the first half and losing the magic in the process. It's less open-ended, the enjoyable Metroidvania-esque design is gutted, the pacing of bonfires gets worse, and the satisfaction is gone, replaced by tedious gimmicks and underwhelming bosses. Fast travel is a cool feature, but it ends up feeling like a crutch for poor design. In 2012, Dark Souls got a DLC called Artorias of the Abyss. I'll be brief. The way to access it is a bit cryptic, so let me explain. In Darkroot Basin, you'll find a Hydra. Kill this Hydra, then quit and load back in. Go around the area the Hydra was in and kill this golem, and you'll free Princess Dusk of Ulasil. Later, in the Duke's Archives, kill this golem to get the broken pendant. Then return to where you met Princess Dusk, and you'll be able to enter the DLC. Artorias of the Abyss takes us back in time to Ulasil, a place that is in danger of being consumed by Manus, Father of the Abyss. Artorias, one of Gwyn's legendary knights, tried to stop him, but failed and was corrupted. It's up to you to explore Ulasil, defeat Artorias, protect his wolf companion Sif, and stop Manus. In the end, Ulasil is still doomed to be consumed by the Abyss, as it was already long gone in your own time. Ultimately, Artorias is the one history will remember for your deeds. Gameplay-wise, it's a return to form, bringing back the Metroidvania-esque layouts and satisfying challenge from the first half while featuring an appropriate level of difficulty for the late game. Manus is a cool boss, and Artorias is one of my favorite fights. It's also cool to get to see Artorias after hearing about him in the base game. The story reinforces themes of decay, the inevitability of death, and the futility of it all. Manus poses an apocalyptic threat, at least to Ulasil, and all you did was delay the inevitable. Artorias is corrupted, a shell of his former self, and his efforts were futile. He ends up getting the credit for everything, but it's not like it really mattered. To conclude, this DLC isn't overly long or complicated, but it reiterates the base game's conceptual ideas and polishes the gameplay experience. Artorias of the Abyss is really what the second half of the game should have been. I just don't have that much more to say about it. It just works. There's so much more I could talk about. I could talk about the game's influences, like the creepy, cryptic vibes that come straight out of Simon's Quest, or the tough but fair design philosophy it follows, like Zelda 2. But we don't have all day. Dark Souls was hugely influential. Challenging games get called the Dark Souls of whatever. From Software broke into the mainstream and would become a major player in the industry. This game was a more popular spiritual successor to their earlier game Demon Souls, and it ended up being the first game of a successful trilogy. It also spawned a genre of Souls-like action games, including other From Software IPs like Bloodborne and Elden Ring. In other words, Dark Souls was kind of a big deal. But it was also a mixed bag. It brought a solid concept to the table, with an interesting minimalist story and a focus on challenging gameplay. But it suffers from a second half where much of the goodwill built up in the first half gets squandered. While the Artorias of the Abyss DLC is enjoyable, it can't fix the issues with the base game. While it is incredibly influential, Dark Souls 1 just doesn't hold up that well. I hope to play more of these games, because the concept is incredible, but the execution could be better. Will it get better in Dark Souls 2? There's only one way to find out, but that's a story for another time. If you have any thoughts on Dark Souls, I'd love to talk about it in the comments down below. Thanks for watching.